A significant and telling change is occurring. A claim once confined to Western analysis is now voiced from within Russia itself. The war, as it was conceived and prosecuted, is lost. Not a collapse tomorrow, but an acknowledgement of strategic failure. For years, Moscow promised steady progress and inevitable victory. Now a chorus of dissenting, even loyalist voices challenges that story. Pro-Kremlin figures who amplified the state's messaging are expressing doubts. Tatiana Montian, Dmitry Rogozin. These insiders' words carry weight. Pavel Gubarev calls it an outright defeat. The narrative of a glorious operation is crumbling. The core calculation. The price is far too high for the gains achieved. What was expected to be swift has become a grinding war of attrition. The current state stands in stark contrast to the invasion's early expectations. In February 2022, leaders assumed a rapid, overwhelming victory. A decisive push into Ukraine. Shatter the armed forces. Collapse the government in Kyiv. Install a compliant regime. Project Russian strength, reassert influence, block a Western tilt. The term downplayed scale, control, and duration. The calculation was flawed from the start. They underestimated resolve and national identity. Instead of capitulating, Ukraine fought back. People united in resistance. Russian forces were repelled from Kyiv's gates. A major turning point. The international response was swift and massive. Western nations rallied. Advanced weapons, finance, intelligence, and training flowed in. For years, pro-Kremlin personalities echoed the state's line. They reinforced strength, justified war, promised victory. Now, some sing a different tune. Tatiana Montian, a prominent loyalist voice, broke ranks. She contradicted the ministry's optimism. In September, she warned offensive momentum had slowed. She suggested last reserves may be committed. A second, unpopular mobilization looms. Manpower shortages plague the army. Dmitry Rogozin echoed the grim outlook. As senator for occupied areas, he has stakes on the ground. He said Russia faces a coalition of high-tech countries. He admitted Ukraine holds a tenfold drone advantage, and Russia pays a colossal price for tiny gains. A military outmatched, worn down by a better-equipped adversary. In a media landscape meticulously curated by the Kremlin, perhaps the most striking sign of a shifting narrative didn't emerge from the shadows of the internet. It erupted in the most controlled environment of all, live on state television, broadcast to millions. This wasn't a fringe blog post, easily dismissed. It happened on NTV, a major federal channel, during its flagship political talk show, Meeting Place, on September 19th. The program is a known bastion of pro-government rhetoric, making what followed all the more shocking. A guest, former politician Boris Nadezhdin, challenged the wildly inflated figures for Ukrainian casualties being circulated by hawkish propagandists, numbers suggesting an army on the verge of collapse. He didn't use secret intelligence, but simple arithmetic. He argued that if the casualty figures being promoted were true, the Ukrainian army would have been annihilated several times over. Yet, he pointed out, their forces were still fighting and growing. The numbers, as he demonstrated for the nation, were a mathematical impossibility. The host appeared stunned as other panelists sat in shocked silence. It was a rare moment of public, real-time fact-checking, directly contradicting the hyper-patriotic narrative that had dominated the airwaves for months. Russian state television is not a forum for debate. It is a tool for state policy, where every talking point is approved. In this rigid ecosystem, for a guest to calmly dismantle a key piece of wartime propaganda was not just unusual. It was a profound breach of protocol.
When the host asked if he was accusing the Ministry of Defense of lying, Nadezhdin gave a masterfully defiant reply. He broadened the accusation, stating, "Not only ours." The implication was devastating, shattering the black and white portrayal of the conflict and suggesting everyone was manipulating the truth.
He then pivoted to a strategic warning, stating it was a huge mistake to underestimate Ukraine. He described them as a strong, motivated army supported by powerful economies, a direct contradiction of the official narrative of a weak, collapsing state. That these comments weren't immediately cut off exposed deep cracks in the media apparatus, signaling a growing restlessness about the war's reality. For viewers at home, it gave permission for doubt to enter the public square. While the Kremlin's control remains formidable, this moment showed its grip on the narrative is not absolute, and that the truth can find a way through. In the stark calculus of modern warfare, propaganda yields to the unblinking truth of data. While official statements project strength, the numbers themselves tell a story of profound failure. It's a narrative written in casualty figures and minuscule territorial shifts, a brutal equation trading massive human loss for nearly insignificant gains. This reality is meticulously documented by open-source intelligence analysts. Groups like the Ukrainian Deep State Map project use public data to provide a verifiable picture of the battlefield, cutting through the fog of war. Let's examine the gains from the offensive that began in 2024. By summer 2025, Russian forces captured approximately 1,548 square kilometers. That's about 597 square miles. To put that in perspective, it's an area smaller than the city of Houston. This represents a mere 0.256% of Ukraine's total landmass, a sliver acquired at a glacial pace. Now consider the cost. From January to August 2025 alone, Russia suffered an estimated 210,000 casualties, soldiers killed or wounded. This followed a brutal 2024, which saw an estimated 427,000 Russian personnel lost. The cumulative total since the start of 2024 is staggering, roughly 637,000 casualties. That's an average of over 1,000 men lost every single day. When you place the cost next to the gain, the strategy unravels. Over 600,000 casualties for less than 1% of territory. That's a horrifying price of more than 400 men for every square kilometer gained. By any military doctrine, this is not a successful campaign. It is the signature of a strategy that has fundamentally failed. It is a meat grinder, a term from World War I, repurposed for a conflict that has devolved into futile, bloody assaults for negligible results. Despite Kremlin pledges to finish off Ukraine's forces, the promised major breakthroughs never materialized. The grand arrows on strategic maps remained mere aspirations. Instead, the war degenerated into grueling, inch-by-inch battles for individual tree lines, shattered villages, and tactically insignificant positions, often lost and retaken multiple times. This is the critical point. For an aggressor with maximalist aims, a war of attrition is a strategic defeat in slow motion. Momentum is lost, resources are hemorrhaged, and international resolve solidifies. A drawn-out stalemate where the daily cost far outweighs any gain is not a path to victory. It is a self-inflicted wound, bleeding a nation's future for a few barren kilometers of foreign soil. As the war of attrition grinds on, the Kremlin faces a challenge as dangerous as any battlefield setback, a profound crisis of credibility on the home front. The cracks in the official narrative are widening. A glaring example emerged when the Ministry of Defense published a map to showcase territorial gains. But observers spotted a bizarre error. The town of Siversk was labeled with its pre-1973 name, Yama. The blunder suggested cartographers were using maps over half a century old, undermining the propaganda victory the map was meant to represent. The mistake went viral, becoming a symbol of institutional decay. Was it sheer incompetence or a clumsy attempt at deception? Either way, trust in official reports was further eroded. For a government that demands absolute belief in its narrative, such unforced errors are deeply corrosive. This credibility gap widens as the tangible costs of the war mount. While casualty numbers are secret, new graves tell their own story. The national budget is reoriented to a war economy, siphoning funds from domestic programs. And crucially, the war is no longer distant. Ukrainian drone strikes now regularly hit deep inside Russia, targeting oil refineries and shattering the population's illusion of security. This domestic pressure intensifies talk of a new mobilization, signaling a severe manpower crisis. Despite a relentless recruitment campaign, the current rate of 35,000 new soldiers per month is proving insufficient. In a brutal war of attrition, that number barely replaces staggering losses, let alone provides forces for new offensives. But a second mobilization would be a monumental political risk. The memory of the chaotic first wave in 2022 is still raw. Men swept up with little warning, handed outdated equipment, and given just days of training. The resulting catastrophic casualties fueled a potent protest movement, the wives and mothers of the mobilized. Their patriotic stance makes them difficult for the Kremlin to discredit, giving their dissent a unique legitimacy. This leaves the Russian leader trapped in a strategic catch-22. He cannot achieve his military objectives without hundreds of thousands of new soldiers. Yet, issuing that order could ignite the very domestic chaos his regime is built to prevent. Some Western analysts believe the endgame is in sight. As retired U.S. General Keith Kellogg has stated, Putin likely knows he cannot win conventionally, and may hope to simply outlast Western support. But even that strategy is under assault. Persistent strikes on Russia's oil refineries are crippling the war economy, reducing revenues and creating domestic fuel shortages. Combined, internal dissent and external pressure create a feedback loop of decline, pointing toward a strategic dead end.